The grand doors of the royal conservatory creaked open, the sound echoing like a death knell in the afternoon silence. Selim stood by the fountain, his back to the entrance, staring at the koi swimming in the marble basin. He did not need to turn around to know who had entered. The air had grown thin, sharp with the scent of lilies, and beneath them, the metallic, bitter undertone of belladonna. "You're late, Serafina," Selim said, his voice light, almost melodic. He turned to face her, a soft, genuine smile playing on his lips. Serafina stood at the threshold, draped in a gown the color of a bruised twilight. Her expression was a masterclass in porcelain indifference, but Selim's eyes, keen and practiced, caught the slight hitch in her breath. Her right hand, elegantly gloved in silk, clutched her folding fan tightly. He knew what was hidden in the intricate, carved ivory handle. "Protocol is tedious, Your Highness," she replied, her voice cold enough to freeze the water in the fountain. She glided toward him, her movements precise, lethal, and practiced. "I assume you haven't forgotten the terms of our engagement?" "How could I?" Selim took a step closer, closing the distance until he was well within the reach of a blade. "My father marries me off to the daughter of the Duke to secure the southern borders. And you, my childhood friend, have been tasked with overseeing the transition." He looked at her, searching for the girl he used to climb apple trees with. She was still there, buried beneath layers of political indoctrination and the crushing weight of her family's debt. "It is a duty," she said, her eyes narrowing. She stepped beside him at the fountain, her gaze fixed on the water. "Nothing more. Then let us perform it well." Selim gestured to the stone table where a silver tea set sat waiting. A maid had already poured the cups, but he knew Serafina had arrived early to ensure the special ingredient was added. He sat down, crossing his legs casually. He picked up his porcelain cup, the steam curling against his face. "Serafina," he said, holding the cup out toward her as if to toast, his eyes locking onto hers. "Do you remember the summer at the Summer Palace? The one where we picked wild berries until our fingers were stained purple?" She froze. The hand holding the fan behind her back trembled just slightly. "I don't recall," she lied, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of a long-buried memory. "I do," Selim whispered, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the poison tea. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. He looked her directly in the eyes, watching the panic bloom across her face as he swallowed the liquid that should have, by all rights, ended his life before the sun set. "I remember everything," he added, setting the cup down with a soft clack. "And I know that for you to kill me, you'll have to look me in the eye. That's a start, isn't it?" Serafina stepped back, her face pale, the fan in her hand clattering to the floor. The game had begun, and for the first time in her life, she had no idea how to play it. The single sip of tea Selim had taken felt like molten lead sliding down his throat. Within seconds, his internal organs began to constrict, a sharp, burning agony radiating from his stomach. The world tilted, the ornate ceiling of the conservatory blurring into a swirl of gold and cream. Yet, Selim forced his muscles to remain slack, his expression fixed in a mask of effortless calm. Serafina stood rigid, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and genuine, unfiltered horror. The porcelain composure she had cultivated for years cracked. You actually drank it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft trickle of the fountain. Her hand, previously clutching the fan, now hovered in the air, trembling. Selim shifted his weight, his grip on the stone table tightening until his knuckles turned white, though he kept his tone light. "I knew you wouldn't use the fast-acting variety, Serafina. You've always had a sentimental streak. Even when you're trying to murder someone, you can't bring yourself to be truly cruel." "You're insane," she hissed, closing the distance between them in a blur of movement. She grabbed his arm, her touch frantic, her warmth a stark contrast to the cold, creeping numbness spreading through his limbs. "I was supposed to have more time. I was supposed to." "To what?" Selim interrupted, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. He looked up at her, meeting her gaze with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, which were beginning to lose their focus. "To find a reason to kill me? Or a reason not to? Because if I hadn't drunk that tea, your family would have sent someone far less merciful than you to finish the job." Serafina's face drained of all color. She reached into the folds of her gown and pulled out a small, crystal vial filled with a shimmering, amber liquid, the antidote. Her hand shook so violently that the glass rattled against her rings. "I was going to use it later. I thought I could just make you sick enough to be bedridden." "Well, now you have to save me instead," Selim wheezed, the pain in his chest intensifying. "That's the beauty of this dance, isn't it? You have the power to end me, or the power to keep the boy you used to climb trees with alive. Which one will you choose?" Serafina didn't hesitate. She uncorked the vial with her teeth and pressed it to his lips, her eyes filled with a desperate, frantic light. "Drink. Please, Selim, just drink it." As the liquid hit his tongue, a wave of cool relief washed over him, slowly fighting back the fire in his veins. He leaned his head back against the stone, his heartbeat slowing to a steady, rhythmic thud. Serafina remained hunched over him, her breath hitching, her face inches from his. "You are the most reckless, infuriating man I have ever known," she breathed, her voice thick with unshed tears. Selim reached up, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. "And you, Serafina, are a terrible assassin." My family will kill me for this, she said, her voice turning cold as reality rushed back in. They'll know. They'll see that you're still standing. Then let them come, Selim replied, his strength slowly returning. He looked at her with a fierce, unwavering intensity. We've survived the poison. Now, we survive the Empire. The atmosphere in the palace had shifted, though no one else seemed to notice. Selim moved through the grand corridors with a renewed sense of purpose, his recovery from the poison hidden behind a facade of regal nonchalance. Every glance from a passing guard or a bowing noble felt like a challenge, but Serafina was always there, a shadow in silk, her presence both a warning and a comfort. We need to talk where the walls don't have ears, Serafina whispered, barely moving her lips as they walked through the sun-drenched atrium. Selim didn't break his stride, but he angled his body toward her. The old conservatory library. The entrance behind the tapestry of the fallen king. We haven't been there since we were 10. I haven't been there in years, she murmured, her gaze fixed forward, her hands clasped tightly before her. It's too dangerous to go now. If your father's spies find us. If they find us, they find two engaged royals discussing wedding arrangements, Selim countered, his voice smooth and untroubled. Don't overthink it, Serafina. That's how you get caught. They met under the cloak of twilight, the halls dim and echoing with the distant hum of palace life. The library was a relic of their shared past, filled with the scent of aging parchment and dust. As Selim pushed the heavy tapestry aside, the hidden latch clicked, revealing the small, circular room where they had once spent endless hours hiding from their tutors. The air inside was stagnant, yet it felt more like home than any other place in the sprawling palace. Serafina walked to a wooden chest in the corner, her fingers trailing over the carvings, a map of their childhood escapades. She reached inside and pulled out a small, intricately folded paper boat, the ink slightly faded but the edges still sharp. You kept it, she said, her voice dropping into a register he hadn't heard in years, vulnerable and soft. I kept everything, Selim replied, stepping into the dim light of the room. He watched her carefully. The cold, calculated assassin was retreating, replaced by the girl who used to dream of escaping the confines of the court. I knew that if I could just get you to remember, to touch these things, the person I used to know would find her way back. Serafina clutched the paper boat to her chest, her knuckles pale. You are playing a dangerous game, Selim. Memories aren't a defense against my family. They aren't going to stop the next attempt on your life. They are my only defense, he insisted, closing the distance between them until he was close enough to see the conflict raging in her eyes. Because you are the only one who knows the truth behind the mask. You know I'm not the monster your father claims I am, and I know you aren't the weapon they built. A sudden sound, the sharp clatter of metal on stone, shattered the intimacy of the room. They both froze, Serafina's hand instinctively dropping to the hidden blade at her waist, her expression shifting back into the cold, sharp gaze of a killer. Guards, she breathed, her posture shifting into a defensive stance. Selim reached out, catching her wrist before she could draw the weapon. His grip was firm, grounding her. Not yet. We act like partners in crime, remember? If they walk in, we are nothing more than a prince and his future queen finding a moment of privacy. Breathe, Serafina. She exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders unwinding just enough. The footsteps passed, the muffled clinking of armor fading down the hall. We are running out of time, Serafina said, her voice regaining its icy edge. My father will expect a report by morning. If I have nothing to give him, he'll send someone else. Then we give him something, Selim decided, his eyes hardening with a new, dangerous resolve. We give him exactly what he wants, but it will be on our terms. The royal palace was transformed into a bastion of opulence for the night gala, with light from hundreds of crystal chandeliers cascading over the velvet-clad nobility. The air was thick with the scent of imported perfumes, heavy wine, and the underlying, jagged tension of hidden agendas. Selim moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his midnight blue suit shimmering under the lights as he held a glass of wine, his eyes constantly scanning for the one person who mattered. Serafina arrived as the clock struck the hour, her entrance causing a ripple of hushed whispers to flow through the hall. She was dressed in an emerald green gown that seemed designed to cut through the soft elegance of the gala with sharp, dangerous precision. Her expression was a mask of perfect, impenetrable coldness, exactly what her family expected to see. Selim intercepted her near the far marble pillars, his voice a low hum that barely reached her ears over the swell of the orchestra. You look breathtaking, Serafina. Though I suspect you have something far deadlier than a fan hidden in that dress tonight. Serafina did not look at him directly, her eyes fixed on the moving sea of guests. My family is watching, Selim. They are expecting a performance, and the deadline for their results is rapidly approaching. They have made it clear that if you survive this night, the consequences for my younger brother will be irreversible. The weight of her words sat between them like a physical barrier. Selim felt the cold reality of their situation. This was no longer just about his own survival, it was a desperate race against her family's cruelty. Then we don't just survive, he whispered, his eyes hardening with a resolve he hadn't revealed to anyone else. We force them to show their hand before they are ready. As the gala reached its peak, a group of men disguised as palace guards began to converge on Selim's position, their movements too synchronized and their eyes too focused to be anything other than a coordinated strike. Serafina caught the subtle shift in the room's energy first. Her instincts, honed by years of training for this very moment, screamed for her to act. "Get down," Serafina commanded, her hand flashing to the hidden blade she had concealed within the lace of her gown. Selim dropped just as a hooded figure lunged, Serafina parrying the attack with a grace that bordered on lethal. The blade in her hand struck true, disarming the assailant before they could reach the prince. The hall erupted into chaos as guests scrambled, the music dying into a discordant screech. Selim stood back to back with her, his pulse racing as he faced the encroaching threat. "You didn't have to do that," he said, parrying a sword blow from another guard. "Don't flatter yourself," she spat, though her movements were perfectly synced with his, protecting him from every angle. "I'm not saving you for your sake, I'm saving the only leverage I have to keep my brother alive." Together, they held the line until the royal guards finally swarmed the hall, forcing the assassins to retreat into the shadows of the gardens. As the dust settled and the panicked nobles were escorted away, Selim reached out to touch Serafina's arm, his breath hitching. She pulled away, her face once again a mask of indifference, though her hands trembled. "You've proven your loyalty to the mission tonight," Selim said, though his heart ached at her forced coldness. "I've bought us one more day," she replied, her gaze distant and haunted. "But tomorrow, the real game begins. And I fear neither of us will be the same when it ends." After the chaos of the night gala, the palace finally fell into a restless, heavy silence. In his private chambers, Selim stood on his balcony, staring out at the darkened gardens where the assassins had vanished only hours before. His mind was a storm of calculations, they were running out of time. With less than 24 hours remaining, if he didn't act, Serafina's family would have the excuse they needed to eliminate her younger sibling. The velvet curtains of his balcony shifted, despite the lack of a breeze. Selim didn't turn around, he knew the subtle, precise movements of a trained shadow. "You really should consider using the door, Serafina," he said, his voice calm. "Coming in through the balcony is becoming a bit cliché." From the shadows, Serafina emerged. Her formal emerald gown was gone, replaced by a sleek, black leather outfit designed for movement and lethality. The mask of the perfect noble lady had vanished, leaving behind a face etched with exhaustion and raw anxiety. She tossed her discarded ballroom jewelry onto his table with a sharp clatter. "Do you honestly think sitting here and waiting will save you?" she demanded, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "My family is suspicious. They saw me shield you at the gala. They don't trust me anymore, Selim." Selim turned, walking slowly toward her. He could see the dark circles under her eyes, the physical toll of the dual life she was forced to lead. "You've risked everything, your standing, your safety, to defy them. Why? You were the perfect assassin." Serafina paused, her gaze dropping to the floor before she met his eyes. There was a flicker of genuine vulnerability there. "I don't know. Perhaps because you are the only person who has ever looked at me and didn't just see a weapon. When I'm with you, I remember the girl I dreamed of becoming, not the puppet they raised." Selim gently reached out, resting a hand near her shoulder. She stiffened, then allowed herself to exhale, the fight draining out of her. "The banquet tomorrow is a trap," Selim stated, his tone turning clinical and sharp. "I know their game. They aren't trying to kill me there, they are trying to destroy me publicly. They plan to give you a weapon, disguised as something else, that will trigger the poison already in my system. They want the court to see you as my murderer, so they can seize the throne while framing you for the crime." Serafina's face flushed with fury. "They would discard me like that? To ruin my honor along with yours?" "Exactly," Selim confirmed. "Which is why we don't play defense anymore. We play their game, but we change the rules. I need you to be the one to strike, but it has to be a deception so perfect that even they believe you have succeeded." Serafina looked at him, searching for the fear he should have been feeling. Instead, she found only absolute, unwavering trust. It was more terrifying than any threat her family had ever leveled at her. "I am in," she said, her voice dropping to a low, resolute whisper. "Tell me what I have to do." Selim leaned in, whispering the details of a plan so reckless it bordered on insanity. As she listened, Serafina's eyes widened, a rare, genuine smile, sharp and dangerous, spreading across her lips. "We aren't just going to survive this," she said, her confidence returning. "We are going to bring their entire empire down around them." The air in the library felt heavy with the weight of the coming storm. Serafina stood by the map of the palace, her fingers tracing the intricate lines of the ventilation shafts and the guard rotation schedule Selim had painstakingly compiled. The reality of their plan was setting in, it was a high-stakes gamble where the only currency was their lives. "You really want me to strike you down in front of everyone?" Serafina asked, her voice steady but laced with the inherent danger of the act. Selim stepped toward her, his movements purposeful and calm. He laid a hand over the map, effectively silencing the doubt in the room. "Not in front of just anyone, Serafina. Only in front of the ones who orchestrated this nightmare. We need them to believe their trap has sprung. When they finally celebrate their victory, they will grow arrogant and careless, and that is when they will expose their own conspiracy." He caught her eyes, ensuring she saw the conviction behind his words. You don't need to fear the poison anymore, Serafina. The only poison here is the betrayal they've fed you for years. Trusting me is your antidote, and it will be their downfall. Serafina felt the familiar cold mask of her training slipping. The vulnerability she had shown earlier remained, but it was now bolstered by a new, shared strength. Why are you so certain I won't just follow through with it? How can you trust me after all these attempts on your life? Selim smiled, a soft, genuine expression that contrasted sharply with the deadly seriousness of the room. Because if you truly wanted me dead, I wouldn't be standing here having this conversation. You aren't the assassin they built, you are simply the girl I grew up with, finally waking up to the truth. He reached into a hidden compartment in the desk and produced a small, sleek metallic device. This is a dummy blade. It uses a retractable tip and an internal pressurized chamber filled with a harmless red dye. When you strike, it will look exactly like a fatal blow, but it will be nothing more than theater. You will be my executioner, and I will disappear into the dungeons via the secret passage I've unlocked. I'll be watching everything from the shadows, waiting for your signal. Serafina took the device, feeling its cold, weighted precision in her palm. The transformation was complete, the doubt was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. And if the plan goes wrong? Then we die together, fighting the same battle, Selim replied softly. She stepped closer, the tension between them transforming into something far more intimate than a tactical alliance. If we survive, our lives will never be the same. We will have to run, Selim. We will have to leave behind everything we've ever known. Selim didn't hesitate. I've spent my whole life being told who to be and what to rule. The only thing I've ever truly wanted was to choose my own path, and I want that path to be with you. Serafina leaned her head against his shoulder, finding a brief moment of peace before the final act of their performance. Tomorrow, the world will think you're dead. But they have no idea that in losing you, they've also lost their control over me. The plan was set. They were no longer a prince and his assassin, they were partners bound by a secret that would either secure their freedom or seal their doom. The royal banquet hall was a scene of blinding opulence, every surface polished to a mirror finish and every chandelier glowing with enough intensity to make the night feel like high noon. Yet, for Selim and Serafina, the gilded environment felt like a closing trap. They had reached the edge of the precipice, and there was no turning back. In the center of the hall, Serafina's father, the Duke, stood with a predatory smile fixed on his face. He beckoned Selim forward, his voice booming for the entire court to hear. Your Highness, tonight we celebrate the union of our houses. A union that secures the Empire's future. Serafina, step forward, show our guests the unwavering loyalty you hold for your future husband. The hall fell into a stifling silence. This was the moment of truth. Selim caught Serafina's gaze, her hand was hidden beneath the folds of her gown, gripping the hilt of the dummy blade. He saw the flicker of hesitation in her eyes, quickly replaced by the cold, calculated discipline of the assassin he once knew. Selim stepped into the spotlight, extending a hand to her. Loyalty is a heavy burden, Duke. But it is one we are prepared to carry together. The Duke signaled, a subtle twitch of his fingers that set the final phase of his plan into motion. Serafina moved with the blur of a practiced killer, closing the distance between them. To the onlookers, it looked like a dance of grace, to Selim, it was the culmination of their dangerous gamble. Serafina lunged, the dummy blade sinking into Selim's chest with a sickening thud that echoed through the stunned silence of the room. Selim threw his arms out, his body jerking as he collapsed backward, a vivid, crimson stain, the chemical concoction, spreading rapidly across his white shirt. Selim, a few voices shrieked, but the room was gripped by a paralyzed horror. Serafina remained poised over him, her face a mask of stone, the blade still held in her hand. The Duke's grin widened, a look of triumph washing over his features. Witness this. A daughter who places her duty to the state above all else. The prince is dead, and our path is clear. He started to step forward, ready to claim the throne, when a cold, calm voice cut through the air, stopping the applause before it could begin. Is it really that clear, Duke? The hall went deathly quiet. Selim sat up, the blood glistening on his shirt, his gaze fixed on the Duke with an expression that was far from dead. He stood up slowly, the dummy blade clattering to the floor, and stepped over the supposed wreckage of his own life. Serafina turned, the assassin mask falling away completely. She wiped a smudge of the red chemical from her hand, her eyes flashing with a fury that made the Duke stumble backward. You didn't end him, father. You just exposed your own treason for the entire court to witness. Panic erupted in the room. The Duke's guards were caught in indecision, their loyalty wavering as they watched the man they thought dead now standing as a judge over their master. Selim and Serafina stood back to back, a united front that defied the very foundation of the Duke's power. The ruse is over, Selim declared, his voice resonating through the hall. Every betrayal, every poison cup, every assassination attempt, it is all documented. And tonight, it ends. Serafina drew her real sword, the steel singing as it left the scabbard. I am no longer your pawn, father. Today, I choose my own path. The Duke's empire was crumbling in real time, the mask of order shattered by the truth. They had not just survived the banquet, they had dismantled the Duke's legacy in a single, perfectly executed stroke. The banquet hall, once a theater of deception, had transformed into a battlefield. The Duke's private guards began to close in, their faces tight with uncertainty, yet driven by the sheer terror of their employer's wrath. However, the tide of the court had turned. Nobles who had long suffered under the Duke's shadow began to murmur, sensing that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted toward Selim and Serafina. Selim stood his ground, his sword drawn and steady. "Duke, the charade is finished. Your crimes, your influence in the shadows, it is all recorded. There is no escape for you tonight." The Duke, his composure shattered, let out a harsh, jagged laugh that echoed through the vaulted ceiling. "Recorded? You foolish boy. You think a few papers and a stage death give you power? You forget your place, and you forget who holds the true reins of this kingdom." His eyes darted toward the side entrance, where a guard stood holding a small, ominous mahogany box. "Serafina, my daughter. You think you have won, but you have forgotten the one thing that keeps your heart tethered to obedience. Your younger brother remains under my absolute control. One command, and he disappears into the void of my dungeons." Serafina froze. The fire in her eyes faltered, replaced by a cold, numbing dread. She had been so focused on Selim's survival that she had momentarily forgotten the collateral damage of her father's cruelty. The Duke opened the box to reveal a small, embroidered handkerchief, a token her brother always carried. "Your choice is simple," the Duke whispered, his voice dripping with malice. "Execute the prince now, or watch your brother pay the price for your betrayal. You have 5 minutes." The hall descended into a suffocating silence. The nobles watched with bated breath, waiting to see if Serafina would crumble. Selim stepped closer to her, lowering his voice, his expression pained. "Serafina, do not do this. We will find another way. We will break him out." Serafina looked at Selim, then back at her father. She saw the trap for what it was, a final, desperate gamble by a man who knew his reign was ending. Her posture shifted, the tremor in her hand stilled, replaced by a terrifying, icy focus. "You give me 5 minutes, father," she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "That is more than enough time for you to realize your error." She turned toward the guards who were supposed to be her father's iron fist. "Look at the man you serve," she commanded, her authority absolute. "He bargains with the lives of children because he can no longer command the respect of soldiers. I have seen the records of his dealings. If you stand with him now, you stand with a dying regime. If you stand with the crown, you stand for the future." Before the Duke could scream a counterorder, a commotion erupted at the rear doors. A group of palace guards, led by the very man who had supposedly held her brother, marched into the hall, escorting a young boy who looked weary but unharmed. The Duke's control over his own security had been systematically dismantled while he was blinded by his own arrogance. The Duke's face contorted in rage, and with a feral cry, he drew his own blade and lunged at Selim. But Serafina was faster. She intercepted his strike, the clash of steel ringing through the hall as they locked blades. It was a brutal, intimate dance of family hatred. "You held my brother over me as a threat," Serafina said, driving her father back against the gilded wall, "but you forgot that you taught me everything I know. And today, I use it to end you." With a swift, practiced motion, she disarmed him, her sword point resting against his throat. The Duke stood panting, his eyes wide as he looked around the hall to find no one coming to his aid. His empire, built on fear and poison, had been reduced to nothing in the span of a single heartbeat. The silence that followed the Duke's defeat was heavy, not with the tension of battle, but with the dawning realization of a new era. The ballroom, once a stage for treacherous plots, now felt like a space reclaiming its sanctity. Nobles who had cowered under the Duke's influence now stood tall, their eyes darting between the fallen tyrant and the prince who had orchestrated his downfall from the shadows of his own death. Selim did not rush to take the Duke's place in the center of the room. Instead, he walked toward the dais, his presence radiating the authority of a ruler who had survived the crucible of betrayal. Serafina stood beside him, her sword sheathed, her presence a silent testament to the fact that the era of coercion had ended. "The Duke's influence was a cancer that thrived in the dark," Selim announced, his voice steady and echoing through the grand chamber. "But as of this hour, the crown assumes full control of the military and the judiciary. His collaborators will be held accountable, not through shadow trials, but through the transparency of the law." The nobles began to murmur, the sound growing into a collective hum of agreement. It was the sound of a kingdom collectively exhaling. Serafina watched as the palace guards, many of whom had been loyal to her father, formally surrendered their weapons to Selim's personal guard. The transition was clinical, swift, and absolute. "We have done it," Serafina whispered, her voice barely audible amidst the shifting loyalties of the court. She looked at her hands, still steady, no longer trembling with the phantom weight of a forced blade. "We have," Selim replied, turning to her. For the first time, he did not look at her as a tactical partner or a former assassin, but as the woman who had fought alongside him for their shared future. "But the real work begins now. We have a kingdom to mend, and a history to rewrite." The banquet hall eventually cleared, the guests departing with the frantic energy of those who had witnessed a revolution. Selim and Serafina remained behind, standing on the balcony that overlooked the capital city. The lights of the city twinkled below, beautiful and fragile, a stark contrast to the cold stone walls that had once imprisoned them. Does it feel real? Serafina asked, her gaze fixed on the horizon. To be free from them? It feels like the first time I have ever truly breathed, Selim said, stepping close enough to touch her hand. The crown was a cage, and the duke was its jailer. Tonight, we broke the locks. They stayed there for a long time, watching the moon climb high over the palace spires. The war for the empire was over, but in the quiet of the night, they both understood that their personal journey, the process of shedding their old identities, was only just beginning. They were no longer the prince and the assassin defined by their families, they were two survivors standing on the brink of an unknown, open-ended life. The aftermath of the revolution had left the royal palace echoing with the ghost of its former self. While the political stability of the kingdom was being restored, the quiet hallways of the library served as the final sanctuary for Selim and Serafina to address the silence between them, a silence no longer filled with the threat of blades or the calculation of poisons. Selim sat at the heavy oak desk, his fingers tracing the edge of a stack of documents that would formalize the new governance. He looked up as Serafina entered, her movements now devoid of the predatory grace she had once relied on to survive. She wore a simple, unadorned gown, her hair loose, looking not like a legend of the shadows, but like a woman finally allowed to exist for herself. "The council is waiting for your signature on the new treaties," Serafina said, leaning against the doorway. Her voice lacked the sharp edge of the assassin, it was measured, calm, and hauntingly human. "They can wait," Selim replied, setting his quill down with a soft click. He gestured for her to join him. "We have spent our entire lives being defined by what others needed us to be. I was the prince in the cage, and you were the blade at my throat. But the cage is open, and the blade is sheathed. What happens now?" Serafina moved toward him, stopping a few feet away. The weight of her past, the debts of her family, the blood on her hands, seemed to linger in the air. "I don't know how to be anything other than a weapon, Selim. Even now, when I sleep, I dream of the next target. How does a monster learn to live in the light?" "You aren't a monster," Selim said, standing up to bridge the gap between them. "You are a survivor. The choice wasn't made when you saved me at the banquet, it was made every single day you chose to hesitate, every time you let me live when you had every opportunity to kill me." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers before he dared to hold it. She didn't flinch. "I am offering you a choice, Serafina. You can stay here as the queen, and we can spend our lives fixing the mess our families created. Or, we can leave. We can take whatever remains of our fortunes and walk out of these gates, never to be seen by the court again." Serafina looked at him, her eyes searching his face for a shadow of deceit, but finding only an open, vulnerable honesty. She thought of the library, the paper boats, and the long, agonizing dance of their deception. "If we stay, we are still tied to the expectations of the people. If we leave, we are running from our responsibilities." "No," Selim corrected, "if we leave, we are choosing our own destiny. If we stay, we are choosing to serve. Both are valid. But I will not do either unless you are standing beside me." Serafina gripped his hand, her fingers interlocked with his. The finality of the decision hung in the air, the ultimate ultimatum that had nothing to do with threats and everything to do with the heart. "I have spent my life killing for others," she whispered, her voice finally cracking with long-suppressed emotion. "I would like to spend the rest of it living for myself. And if you are there, Selim, then I choose to stay. Then we rewrite the rules of this kingdom," Selim vowed, his resolve hardening. "Starting with us." The ink on the new treaties had barely dried when the shadows in the palace corners began to stir. Though the Duke had been defeated, his network was a sprawling, poisoned root system that went deeper than Selim had anticipated. Loyalists, mercenaries, rogue officials, and fanatical assassins, who had operated under the Duke's umbrella realized that with Selim and Serafina holding the throne, their livelihoods, their illicit trades, and their power were at an end. They struck on a night of a heavy thunderstorm, when the palace guards were distracted by the sheer ferocity of the wind and rain. The alarm did not sound until the royal residential wing was already compromised. "They aren't here for a political coup," Serafina whispered, her voice cold and sharp as she donned her familiar black leather gear. She didn't look like a queen in that moment, she looked like the storm itself. "They are here for an extermination." Selim stood by his desk, already armed. "They want to wipe us out before the new reforms take root. If we fall tonight, they hope the kingdom will collapse back into the chaos they can control." The battle was not fought in the grand ballrooms, but in the claustrophobic, dimly lit corridors of the palace. Selim and Serafina moved with the lethal efficiency of a unit that had been forged in the fire of mutual betrayal and refined by their new, unwavering bond. They fought with a fluid, silent grace, where Selim drew the enemy's focus, Serafina exploited the openings, her movements precise and final. Yet, the sheer number of intruders was overwhelming. They were pushed back until they reached the high, arched windows of the grand gallery overlooking the capital. The gallery doors splintered under the force of a battering ram, and the loyalists poured in, led by the Duke's former master of whispers. "The kingdom doesn't want you, Prince," the traitor hissed, his sword dripping with blood. "It wants the chaos it knows." Selim stepped forward, his eyes blazing. "The kingdom wants a future, and I am the one building it." As the skirmish intensified, the floorboards, weakened by age and the intensity of the fight, began to give way. Serafina realized too late that the leader of the Loyalists had rigged the structure to collapse. As the center of the gallery disintegrated, she lunged toward Selim to shove him clear of the abyss, but her own footing failed. They plummeted into the darkness of the lower storage levels, the world crashing down around them in a haze of splintered wood and dust. The impact was jarring, leaving both of them gasping for breath in the dark, debris-filled room. "Selim?" Serafina coughed, trying to push a heavy beam off her leg. "I'm here," he wheezed, his voice straining. He scrambled toward her, his hands frantic as he cleared the rubble. Above them, the remaining Loyalists roared in triumph, believing they had finally succeeded. But they were wrong. As the dust settled, Serafina felt the familiar, cold surge of adrenaline. She looked at Selim, their hands clasping tightly in the dark. "They think they've won," she whispered, her voice filled with a dangerous, quiet heat. Selim gripped her hand, his eyes reflecting the dim light filtering through the cracks above. "Let them believe it. It'll make their defeat that much sweeter when we return." The lower storage levels were cold, damp, and smelled of centuries-old dust. Selim and Serafina pulled themselves from the wreckage, bruised and battered, but alive. The sound of celebratory shouting echoed faintly from the gallery above, the Loyalists convinced that the throne was now empty. "They are celebrating too early," Selim muttered, wiping a streak of blood from his forehead. He looked at Serafina, who was already assessing her injuries with the clinical eye of a veteran assassin. "They think they've cut the head off the snake," she replied, her voice steady despite the pain. She reached into a hidden compartment of her gear, retrieving a small, emergency flare, a signal device used by the Royal Scouts to communicate across the palace grounds. "But they don't realize that the snake is still breathing." She ignited the device. A brilliant, sapphire-blue light shot through the cracks in the ceiling, piercing the night sky. Within minutes, the palace grounds erupted with the sound of Loyalist soldiers, the ones who had stayed true to Selim's reforms, storming the building. The battle above was short and brutal. The conspirators, caught in their own arrogance and blinded by their premature celebration, were systematically rounded up. When Selim and Serafina finally emerged from the rubble, they were met not by enemies, but by their own guards, bowing in relief and reverence. The Master of Whispers was dragged before them, his face pale with the realization that his grand design had failed. Selim looked at him with no malice, only the cold clarity of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and survived. "You chose chaos because you feared change," Selim said, his voice carrying the weight of a king. "But change is the only thing that will keep this empire standing. You are no longer part of our future." As the traitors were led away, the morning sun began to crest over the palace spires, casting a golden light across the courtyard. The air felt clean, the lingering scent of poison and betrayal finally washed away by the morning rain. Serafina walked to the edge of the balcony, looking out at the city. She felt a lightness in her chest, the realization that she no longer had to look over her shoulder, no longer had to count the seconds until her next mission. She felt a presence beside her and didn't need to turn to know it was Selim. "The throne is secure," Selim said softly, looking out at the waking world. "And the choice is finally ours." Serafina turned to face him, the last barriers between them dissolving. "We have nothing left to prove to anyone. No more masks, no more games." "No more," Selim agreed. He reached out, taking her hand, and this time, there was no hesitation. "Just us." They stood there as the kingdom moved into a new day. They had started their journey as enemies, bound by family, hate, and poison, but they had arrived at the end of that path as something entirely new. They were no longer the prince and the assassin, but two people who had defied the very fate their families had written for them. The palace was quiet, save for the distant sound of birds chirping. They had survived the fire, the poison, and the betrayal. The vow was unpoisoned, their future was blank, and for the first time in their lives, they were truly free. Story complete.